The sun rose gently over Ouagadougou, painting the sky with soft streaks of gold and rose. The streets were quieter than usual, as if the city itself had agreed to let the president wake up in peace. It was March 14th, a date that would soon become more significant than anyone could have imagined. Inside the modest presidential residence, Ibrahim Traoré was already awake, sitting at his desk by the window with a steaming cup of tea. The steam curled upward in delicate spirals, mixing with the early morning light that filtered through simple white curtains. This was his sanctuary, this quiet corner where he could think without the weight of a nation pressing down on his shoulders. It was his birthday, a date the entire nation knew, though he himself had never liked making a big event of it. For most people, birthdays meant parties, music, and gifts. But for him, it had always been a day of reflection. He thought of his late mother who had once made him a cake from corn flour and honey when he was just a boy. She couldn't afford more, but she had told him, "It's not the size of the cake, my son, but the size of your heart that matters." Those words had never left him. They had shaped every decision he made, every policy he implemented, every quiet act of kindness he performed when no cameras were watching. As he sat quietly, memories flooded back, not of grand political victories or international recognition, but of small moments that had defined his character. He remembered being 7 years old, watching his father work in the fields from dawn to dusk, his hands cracked and bleeding from the harsh soil. His father had never complained, never spoken of the injustice of working so hard for so little. Instead, he had simply said, "Son, a man's worth isn't measured by what he takes from this world, but by what he gives back." These lessons had crystallized into a personal philosophy that guided every aspect of his leadership. Power, he believed, was not a privilege to be enjoyed, but a responsibility to be shouldered. Every decision he made, he asked himself, how will this help the child who has no shoes? How will this feed the family who skips meals? How will this build the future we owe to the next generation? His assistant Musa entered the room with a warm smile, interrupting his reverie. "Mr. President, people are already gathering outside the gates." "They want to sing for you," Ibrahim smiled gently. "I told them not to make a fuss." "You know they will anyway, sir," Musa replied, placing a small plate of freshly baked bread on the desk. "The country loves you too much to stay silent today." From the window, Ibrahim could see them. Hundreds of citizens standing behind the security barriers, holding handmade signs. Some said, "Long live Traoré," others simply, "Thank you." Children waved small flags, their faces glowing with excitement. For a moment, he stood there watching them, his chest tightening with emotion, but even as he looked at the celebration, his mind was elsewhere. He thought of the children in villages who had no shoes, of farmers who still struggled to get enough water for their crops, of mothers who skipped meals so their children could eat. Today was supposed to be his day, but all he could think about was their lives. The weight of leadership, he had learned, was not just about making big decisions in presidential meetings. It was about carrying the dreams and struggles of millions of people in your heart every single day. It was about waking up each morning knowing that your choices could change someone's life, or save it. Around 9 o'clock, he stepped outside, wearing a simple white shirt and his emblematic military beret. The crowd erupted in cheers that echoed through the quiet morning streets. A group of school children sang a birthday song in 3 different languages, Mooré, French, and Dioula. Their voices, sweet and pure, carried across the courtyard like a blessing. When they finished, Ibrahim bent down and hugged one of the smallest girls in the group, a shy child with big brown eyes and worn sandals. Her name tag read Student of Excellence, but her clothes told the story of a family struggling to make ends meet. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Aisha," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crowd's murmur. "And how old are you?" 8, he knelt to her level, looking directly into her eyes. "You'll see a better Burkina Faso when you're my age, Aisha. I promise you that." The crowd roared with approval, but he didn't say it for them. He said it because he truly believed it, and because he was already working to make it happen. In his pocket was a small notebook where he kept track of children like Aisha, their names, their schools, their dreams. Most of them would never know that the president of their country remembered their individual stories. But he did. As he interacted with more children in the crowd, each conversation reinforced his conviction that education was the key to breaking the cycle of poverty that had gripped his nation for too long. These children weren't just citizens. They were the engineers, doctors, teachers, and leaders who would build the Burkina Faso of tomorrow. Back inside, his staff had prepared a small gathering for breakfast in the courtyard. There were no luxuries, just tea, bread, local fruits, and roasted peanuts. The simplicity was intentional. Ibrahim had long ago decided that leadership meant living modestly while others still struggled. His ministers brought simple gifts: a book of African poetry, a framed photograph from his first day as president, and a hand-carved wooden statue by a local artist. Each gift reflected the culture and values he held dear: authenticity, heritage, and the celebration of local talent. But what moved him most was a small envelope placed discreetly beside his tea. No name, no stamp, just a simple folded note. It read, "Thank you for paying my school fees when I had no hope left. I'm now a nurse, and I save lives in the village of Kaya. You may not remember me, but I will never forget you." He stared at the note for a long time, his throat tight with emotion. Memories of countless private acts of kindness came flooding back. Payments made discreetly, medical bills settled without announcement, school fees covered anonymously. He had never done these things for recognition, but seeing the impact written down like this was different. It made the abstract concept of serving the people tangible and real. The letter reminded him of a fundamental truth he had learned early in his leadership. The most important work often happens in silence, away from cameras and press conferences. It happens in hospital rooms where families can't afford treatment, in schools where children drop out because of poverty, in villages where a single well can transform an entire community. As the morning passed, journalists gathered outside for the usual birthday speech. But what no one knew was that this birthday would be different from all others. Somewhere in the hands of a young journalist was a secret video that would soon be uploaded to the internet, a video that would reveal something about Ibrahim Traoré that even his closest friends didn't fully know. And once the world saw it, they would never look at him the same way again. The video had been captured over several months by various citizens who had witnessed something extraordinary. Their president quietly visiting rural schools across the country, not for photo opportunities or political gain, but to personally ensure that no child was denied an education due to poverty. The young journalist who had compiled these clips was named Fatimata Ouedraogo, a recent journalism graduate who had been working on a documentary about education in rural Burkina Faso. What she had discovered by accident would soon shake the nation to its core. Fatimata had initially been frustrated by the lack of access to high-profile politicians for her documentary. But as she traveled from village to village interviewing teachers and parents, she kept hearing the same story. A mysterious benefactor was paying for children's education, and somehow, this benefactor always seemed to know exactly which families needed help the most. It wasn't until her third month of research that she realized the truth. During a visit to a remote school in the Sahel region, she had hidden behind a tree to film the poor conditions when a black SUV arrived. Out stepped President Traoré, dressed not in presidential attire but in simple, faded clothes. He spent hours talking with teachers, reviewing enrollment records, and personally handing out scholarship certificates to dozens of children. Fatimata's hands had trembled as she filmed, realizing she was documenting something unprecedented in African politics, a leader who was literally investing his own resources in his people's future. With no desire for publicity or political benefit, the sun climbed higher in the sky, pouring its heat over the presidential residence. Birds hopped around the courtyard, pecking at crumbs from the morning breakfast. Ibrahim Traoré sat in the garden under the shade of a nere tree, away from cameras, surrounded only by a handful of trusted friends and family members. There was no grand banquet, no champagne tower, no golden decorations, Just a long wooden table with clay cups of hibiscus juice, plates of fried plantains, and steaming bowls of rice with meat. It was how he liked it. Simple, authentic, unpretentious. His younger sister Miriam leaned toward him with a teasing smile. "Do you remember when we were children and you swore you'd never celebrate your birthday because you didn't want to waste food on yourself?" He laughed, shaking his head. "And I still mean it. But you people keep trapping me into these gatherings." Miriam's face softened. "We're not here to waste food. We're here because we're proud of you and because we know you never do anything for yourself. Today, let us at least do this for you." The laughter and conversation flowed easily. Someone began playing the kora, the gentle strings mixing with the distant sound of traffic from the city streets. Ibrahim found himself relaxing for the first time that day, allowing himself to simply be a brother, a friend, a human being rather than a president. But even as he smiled and participated in the banter, there was a heaviness in his chest, a weight he could never really put down. Leading a nation in difficult times meant living with a constant sense of unfinished business. Every moment of joy was tempered by the knowledge that somewhere, someone was still suffering, still waiting for help that might never come. Just as dessert, a humble plate of sweet millet porridge was being served, Musa, his assistant, approached. His face looked tense, uncertain. "Sir, I think you should see this," he whispered. Musa handed him a tablet. On the screen was a video uploaded just minutes earlier on a popular social media platform. The caption read, "The truth about what Ibrahim Traoré does when no one is watching." Ibrahim frowned. "What is this?" "Just watch, sir." The video began with grainy footage of a dusty schoolyard in a rural village. Children sat on wooden benches, their uniforms worn but carefully pressed. A black SUV stopped, and Ibrahim got out, dressed not in his presidential attire but in simple pants and a faded shirt. The person filming stayed hidden behind a tree. The video showed him talking with the school principal, then pulling out a small stack of papers. The voiceover, recorded by the anonymous filmmaker, explained, "What you're about to see has never been reported. Over the past 2 years, President Traoré has quietly visited more than 30 rural schools across Burkina Faso. Without media coverage, without government announcement, he has given full scholarships to over 10,000 underprivileged children, covering their tuition, books, uniforms, and even meals." The video cut to a scene where Ibrahim knelt to speak with a young boy whose father had died in a farming accident. "You'll stay in school," he said firmly to the boy. "One day, you'll be the one building roads and hospitals for our people." In another clip, he hugged a girl who was about to drop out of school to work in the fields. "You belong in class," he said gently. "The fields will wait. Your future cannot." As the video continued, it showed scene after scene of personal interactions. Ibrahim sitting on classroom floors talking with children, reviewing their report cards, promising them that education would be their path to a better life. In each scene, he was not the president. He was simply a man who believed deeply in the power of knowledge to transform lives. By the end of the video, Ibrahim was staring at the screen in silence. His friends and family had been frozen, their eyes glistening with tears. The weight of his secret work, now exposed to the world, hung heavy in the air. "Sir," Musa said softly, "the video is going viral. Already tens of thousands of shares. People are calling it the birthday gift we didn't know he was giving." Ibrahim's voice was quiet. "I never wanted this to be known. It was never for publicity." His sister placed a hand on his arm. "And maybe that's exactly why it's moving everyone to tears. Because it's real." Outside the walls of the residence, the crowd that had gathered earlier was growing. Some had seen the video on their phones and were now chanting not his name but his words to the children. "For the children! For the children!" He closed his eyes, listening to the chant rise like a wave. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about a promise, one he had made silently to himself long before becoming president. But the day wasn't over. There were still more surprises, more acts of kindness that had remained hidden until now. And by nightfall, it would leave the entire nation, and even him, in tears. By midday, the city of Ouagadougou was buzzing. The leaked scholarship video had already been picked up by national television channels, but now it was crossing borders. West African news networks were broadcasting it on loop, while social media feeds from Dakar to Lagos were flooded with clips of Ibrahim's quiet visits to rural schools. The hashtags For the Children and President Promise were trending worldwide. International journalists were already requesting interviews, but Ibrahim refused them all. He had no interest in explaining himself in front of cameras. He knew that if he appeared to take credit, the purity of the act might be lost. However, what no one outside his closest circle knew was that the scholarships were just one part of the story. The footage people had seen was only a fraction of a much larger mission, a mission that had begun years earlier when he was still a young officer. Back then, he had developed a habit of saving a portion of his salary each month, not for personal comfort, but for what he called his silent investments. These were direct interventions in the lives of struggling citizens, paying off debts, building wells, and in one case, quietly covering the cost of life-saving surgery for a child in a remote village. The philosophy behind these actions was simple but profound. Leadership was not about accumulating power or wealth, but about using whatever resources you had to lift others up. Every franc he spent on someone else's education or health care was an investment in the country's future. That afternoon, another video began circulating. This one hadn't been filmed secretly. It had been recorded by a small community radio station months earlier, but had never left their archives. It showed Ibrahim wearing dusty boots, helping a group of villagers dig a new water channel. There was no security escort, no official banner, just him, working shoulder to shoulder with the residents. The radio station's narrator explained, "He came to our village unannounced. We thought it would just be a quick visit, but he worked with us for hours, shoulder to shoulder. Before leaving, he paid for the cement and tools we needed to finish the project. He told us, 'I'm not here as president today. I'm here as your brother.' The emotional impact was immediate. Online, people began sharing personal stories of how the president had helped them without ever seeking recognition. A university graduate posted a photo of himself in cap and gown, writing, 'I was one of the children he sponsored. I never knew where the money came from until today.' A widow from the Sahel region posted, 'After my husband died, someone paid my children's school fees for 2 years. I just found out it was him.' The comment sections were filled with crying emojis, heart emojis, and messages of gratitude. But more than that, they were filled with stories, hundreds of them, of quiet acts of kindness that had changed lives forever. Inside the presidential residence, Ibrahim was pacing slowly, phone in hand, reading some of the messages. He could feel his throat tightening again. The scale of the response was overwhelming, not because people were praising him, but because he was seeing, perhaps for the first time, the full impact of his actions. Mariam, his sister, noticed his glistening eyes. "Are you crying?" He wiped a tear from his cheek. "It's overwhelming. I never wanted anyone to know. But now maybe I see that it wasn't about me. Maybe people need to be reminded that leadership is about service, not power." The tears weren't just his own. Across the country, in living rooms and coffee shops, in schools and offices, people were watching the videos and crying. They were crying for the children who now had hope, for the president who had shown them what leadership could look like, and for themselves, because they had been reminded that goodness still existed in the world. Musa entered the room again, looking both excited and nervous. "Sir, something else has happened. What is it now?" "The video has been shown at a school assembly in Bobo Dioulasso, at a youth conference in Accra. And here's the part you won't believe. Children in Kenya recorded a song for you. A song called Thank You for Tomorrow. It's already been viewed over 1 million times." As if the day couldn't become more emotionally charged, the Kenyan children's song began playing on radios across Burkina Faso. Their sweet voices, singing in Swahili and English, carried a message that transcended borders. "You opened the door we thought was closed. You lit the lamp when the night was cold. You gave us tomorrow when we only had today." By late afternoon, the streets in front of the presidential gates were filled not just with citizens, but also with musicians, poets, and school groups holding banners with messages like, Education is the best gift, and keep the promise alive. It was no longer just a birthday celebration. It had become a national movement of gratitude and hope. Children from schools across the capital began arriving in buses, many of them carrying flowers picked from their own gardens. Local artists set up easels and began painting portraits of the president, not in his official regalia, but as they had seen him in the videos, kneeling beside children, working alongside farmers, being simply human. But the day still held one last emotional twist, an event so personal that Ibrahim himself would not be able to hold back his tears. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long golden shadows over Ouagadougou. The crowd in front of the presidential residence had doubled in size, their chanting now mixed with the sound of drums and flutes. Some people had brought baskets of fruit, others carried small bags of rice as symbolic birthday gifts for the president. Inside, Ibrahim was quietly preparing for a meeting he had told no one about, not even the journalists outside who were desperate for an interview. At 5 p.m., without any official announcement, Ibrahim slipped into the back seat of an ordinary white van. With Mariam and Musa, they drove to a children's hospital on the outskirts of the city, a place he had visited many times in secret. The smell of antiseptic filled the air as he walked through the narrow corridors. Doctors and nurses seemed surprised, but quickly smiled when they saw him. In the pediatric ward, dozens of children lay in small beds connected to IV drips. Some wore colorful knitted caps to cover heads shaved for cancer treatment. He moved from bed to bed, holding small hands, whispering encouragement, and joking to make them smile. To one little boy no older than 6, he handed a small toy car. "You'll drive a real one someday," Ibrahim said with conviction. In the corner of the room, a mother clutched her sleeping baby. She tried to stand when she recognized him, but he shook his head. "Stay. You've already carried enough weight." He knelt beside her and pressed an envelope into her palm. Inside was enough money to cover her child's treatment for the next year. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Just promise me you'll tell your child that a stranger cared about him," he replied, softly. These moments in the hospital revealed perhaps the deepest aspect of Ibrahim's character. Here, away from politics and policy, he was simply a man who understood that behind every statistic was a human story. Behind every hospital bed was a family's entire world. Leaving the hospital, Ibrahim directed the driver to a small neighborhood where an elderly widow lived. A few months earlier, her house had been damaged by a storm, and she was living under a patched tin roof. When she opened the door and saw him standing there, she gasped, covering her mouth. "Mr. President, at my home!" "I heard the rain still comes through your roof," he said simply. She nodded, embarrassed. "Well, it won't anymore." Within minutes, workers who had been waiting nearby began unloading construction materials. Ibrahim personally handed her the keys to a newly built section of her house. The old woman cried so hard that neighbors came running to see what had happened. When they realized, they began applauding and singing in his honor. But the gesture was about more than just fixing a roof. It was about dignity, about ensuring that every citizen, regardless of age or economic status, had the right to live with basic comfort and security. The final stop was at a modest roadside shop owned by a middle-aged man named Karim. Years earlier, Karim had taken out a small business loan but had fallen into debt when thieves robbed his store. He had been working tirelessly to pay it back, one coin at a time. Ibrahim walked in quietly, bought a small bottle of water, then placed a folded receipt on the counter. "What's this?" Karim asked. "It's proof that your debt is gone," Ibrahim said simply. Karim unfolded the paper and saw the bank stamp. "Paid in full." His hands trembled. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Ibrahim smiled. No man should be punished forever for a stroke of bad luck. These weren't grand gestures designed for headlines. They were personal interventions based on a simple philosophy, those with the ability to help have a responsibility to do so. Each act was a thread in the larger fabric of building a more just society. When they returned to the presidential residence, the sky was taking on a deep orange hue. The crowd outside was still there, singing, applauding, and now holding candles. They had no idea what he had just spent his afternoon doing, and then, without warning, another video appeared online. This one, filmed by someone at the hospital earlier, showed Ibrahim sitting on the floor beside a sick child's bed, holding the boy's hand and humming a gentle lullaby. The caption read, "Even on his birthday, he gives the day to others." The clip spread like wildfire. Comment sections filled with messages like, "This man is rare, we don't deserve him," and "May God protect Traoré." But the most powerful response came from an unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Kone, the head pediatrician at the Children's Hospital, decided to break her usual silence about the president's visits. In a video statement she posted online, she revealed something that would complete the picture of Ibrahim's character. "For the past 3 years," she said, her voice steady but emotional, "President Traoré has been the anonymous donor covering the medical expenses of children whose families cannot afford treatment. He made me promise never to reveal this, but today, seeing how moved the nation is by his other acts of kindness, I believe people deserve to know the full extent of his heart." She went on to explain that Ibrahim had personally funded surgeries, chemotherapy treatments, and long-term care for dozens of children. "He never asked for reports or updates," she said. "He just wanted to know that no child would be turned away because of money." The weight of the day began to sink into him. He hadn't planned for his private acts to be broadcast to the world. But maybe, he thought, the country needed it. Not as a reason to praise him, but as proof that kindness could still exist in power. As night fell completely over Ouagadougou, the presidential residence glowed softly under warm yellow lights. But outside the gates, it looked like the entire city had gathered. Thousands of people stood shoulder to shoulder, candles in hand, their flickering flames painting the air with a sea of light. The chants had become quieter now, replaced by a constant hum of anticipation. Some people had brought drums, but they played them softly, as if they knew the night had taken on a sacred tone. Ibrahim stood just behind the iron gates, looking at the faces, young and old, rich and poor, farmers and students, all there for him, or perhaps not just for him, but for what he had come to represent. The moment felt historic, not just for Burkina Faso, but for the entire continent. Here was a leader who had chosen service over self-interest, who had used power to lift others rather than enrich himself. In an era of cynicism about politics, his example offered something precious: hope. Miriam touched his arm. "They're waiting." He nodded, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. The gates opened slowly, and the crowd erupted in cheers before falling silent when he raised his hand. "Tonight," he began, his voice firm but thick with emotion, "is my birthday. But for many years now, I have believed that this day doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the people who made me who I am. The villages that raised me, the teachers who refused to give up on me, the farmers who taught me that the land will only feed you if you respect it first." He paused, scanning the faces before him. Each face told a story, represented a dream, carried hopes for a better future. I never wanted the world to know about the children's scholarships. I did it because I remember what it was like to be one of them, to be a boy with big dreams but empty pockets. I did it because education is the bridge that can carry us from where we are to where we need to go. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The power of his words lay not in their eloquence, but in their absolute sincerity. This was not a politician giving a speech. This was a man sharing his heart. But tonight, I realized that maybe these acts of kindness were never meant to stay hidden. Maybe they were meant to remind all of us, leaders and citizens alike, that we have the power to change lives, to build hope, to create the future our children deserve. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the gathering, a sound rose. Children's voices singing. It took a moment for Ibrahim to recognize the melody. It was the song from Kenya, "Thank You for Tomorrow." But this was different. These were Burkinabe children. And as they sang, the crowd parted to reveal them. A group of boys and girls, all wearing uniforms from different schools across the country. Many of them were among the 10,000 children whose education he had quietly funded. They sang in French, Mouret, and Dioula, their voices carrying words of gratitude that pierced the night. You opened the door we thought was closed. You lit the lamp when the night was cold. You gave us tomorrow when we only had today. Ibrahim's chest tightened, and he blinked rapidly, trying to maintain his composure. But then he noticed something. Some of these children were holding photographs. A boy stepped forward and held his photo high. It was a picture of his father, who had died in the army years earlier. "You didn't just give me school," the boy said loudly. "You gave me back hope." Another girl stepped forward, her voice trembling. "I was going to be married at 13, but you gave me the chance to finish school instead. I'll be a doctor someday." One by one, children shared their stories. Each testimony was a testament to the transformative power of education, to the way a single person's compassion could change the trajectory of an entire life. The crowd was silent except for the children's voices. Then, as if on cue, the singing stopped, and one final child stepped forward, a small, shy boy wearing an oversized uniform shirt. He held out a small handmade birthday card, its edges uneven from being cut with dull scissors. On the front, in shaky handwriting, it read, "Thank you for being our father when we needed one." Ibrahim took the card slowly, his hands shaking. He looked at the boy, then at the thousands of faces watching him, and finally he couldn't hold back any longer. Tears flowed freely down his cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. He let them flow because at that moment he knew the entire nation was crying with him. "I am just one man," he said, his voice breaking. "But if one man can do so much, imagine what we could accomplish together." The crowd erupted not in cheers, but in applause, the kind of applause that feels like an embrace. People began chanting again, not his name, but his words. "For the children! For the children!" The chant spread beyond the crowd, picked up by people watching on television and social media. Across the country, families gathered around radios and phones, joining their voices to the chorus. It became more than a chant. It became a promise, a collective commitment to prioritizing the next generation's future. That night, the images of the candlelit crowd, the children singing, and the president wiping tears from his face would travel around the world. Millions would watch it. Many would cry. And in homes across Africa, parents would tell their children, "This is what leadership looks like." International news outlets that typically focused on conflict and crisis in Africa would find themselves reporting a different story, one of hope, compassion, and authentic leadership. The video would be shared by millions, translated into dozens of languages, and become a symbol of what was possible when power was used for service rather than self-interest. The impact extended far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. In neighboring countries, citizens began asking why their own leaders couldn't follow Ibrahim's example. Students at universities across West Africa organized discussions about the kind of leadership they wanted to see. Young people who had become cynical about politics began to hope again. In Ghana, a group of university students started a scholarship fund inspired by Ibrahim's example. In Senegal, a successful businessman anonymously paid school fees for 500 children, leaving only a note that read, "Following the Traoré way." In Nigeria, social media was flooded with posts, challenging politicians to show the same level of personal sacrifice and direct service to citizens. The story had tapped into something deeper than admiration for one man's character. It had awakened a longing across the continent for leadership that was rooted in service, for politicians who remembered that their role was to serve the people rather than themselves. African diaspora communities around the world organized viewing parties to watch the videos together, many shedding tears of pride for a continent that had given the world so much culture, wisdom, and natural beauty, but had often been portrayed only through the lens of its struggles. The international reaction was equally profound. In classrooms from London to Tokyo, teachers used Ibrahim's story to discuss different models of leadership. The video of him sitting on the hospital floor, humming to a sick child, became an iconic image of compassionate governance. World leaders, initially skeptical that the story could be true, sent delegations to verify the claims. What they found was even more impressive than the videos had shown. Ibrahim had not only personally funded education and healthcare, but had also lived modestly, refusing many of the perks that came with his position. His official salary, they discovered, was donated back to the state treasury each month, with Ibrahim living on a modest stipend that was less than what many mid-level government employees earned. His residence, while comfortable, was spartanly furnished. His meals were simple. His few possessions were books, family photos, and letters from citizens. The discovery prompted soul-searching among politicians worldwide. If a leader of one of the world's least wealthy nations could live so modestly and give so generously, what excuse did others have for their excess and indifference? But the global attention also brought challenges. Ibrahim found himself struggling with the loss of privacy that came with his newfound international fame. The quiet acts of kindness that had given him so much personal satisfaction were now difficult to perform without attracting media attention. More troubling was the way some people began to treat him as a saint rather than a human being. He received letters from around the world asking for miracles, requesting impossible interventions, treating him as if his compassion was limitless and his resources infinite. In quiet moments with his sister Mariam, he expressed his discomfort with the hero worship. "I'm just doing what anyone in my position should do," he would say. The fact that it seems extraordinary says more about how low our expectations of leadership have become than about anything special about me. Mariam would remind him that his discomfort with praise was precisely what made him worthy of it. "The leaders who seek glory are the ones who deserve it least," she would say. "The ones who are embarrassed by praise are usually the ones who have earned it." Perhaps the most moving aspect of the global response came from children around the world who began writing letters to Ibrahim. These letters, arriving by the hundreds each week, came from refugee camps and suburban neighborhoods, from rural villages and urban slums. A child from a refugee camp in Jordan wrote, "Thank you for showing us that leaders can be kind. When I grow up, I want to be a president like you." From a school in rural India, "We are collecting money to help children in our village go to school. We learned about collecting money from you. From an inner-city school in Detroit. Our teacher showed us your video. We want to know, how can kids like us help other kids like us?" Ibrahim tried to respond personally to as many letters as possible, often staying up late into the night to write back. His responses were simple but heartfelt, always encouraging the children to pursue their education and to help others whenever they could. To the child from Jordan, he wrote, "You don't need to be a president to be a leader. Every time you help a friend with homework, every time you share your food with someone who is hungry, you are leading with your heart." To the students collecting money in India, "You have already learned the most important lesson of leadership, that we rise by lifting others. Your village is lucky to have you." To the children in Detroit, "Start where you are with what you have. The greatest changes often begin with the smallest acts of kindness." 1 year after that transformative birthday, the impact of Ibrahim's example had created ripples that continued to spread across the globe. The Traoré model had become a subject of study in political science courses, business schools, and leadership seminars worldwide. In Burkina Faso itself, the changes were tangible. Inspired by their president's example, citizens had begun organizing their own community improvement initiatives. Teachers in rural schools reported unprecedented support from parents and community members. Local businesses started scholarship programs. Wealthy families began quietly funding infrastructure projects in poor neighborhoods. The culture of giving that Ibrahim had modeled had become contagious. It wasn't organized or mandated by the government. It was organic, arising from people who had seen what was possible when those with resources chose to share them with those in need. Dr. Sarah Kone, the pediatrician who had revealed Ibrahim's anonymous donations to the Children's Hospital, established the Tomorrow's Promise Foundation, which coordinated healthcare funding for children across West Africa. Within 6 months, it had received donations from around the world and was treating hundreds of children who might otherwise have gone without care. In interviews that he finally began granting to select journalists, Ibrahim articulated the philosophy that had guided his actions. Leadership, he would say, is not about being served. It's about serving. It's not about accumulating power for yourself, but about using whatever power you have to lift others up. He spoke about the concept of Ubuntu, the African philosophy that recognizes the interconnectedness of all people. I am because we are, he would explain. My success means nothing if my people are still struggling. My comfort is hollow if children in my country are going to bed hungry. These interviews, conducted in the same simple setting where he had been filmed on his birthday, became widely circulated masterclasses in ethical leadership. Business schools began requiring their students to watch them. Political training programs incorporated his principles into their curricula. But perhaps most importantly, his words resonated with ordinary people who were looking for leaders they could believe in, for politicians who remembered that their role was to serve the public rather than to enrich themselves. However, the international attention also brought unexpected challenges. Ibrahim found that his every move was now scrutinized, his every decision analyzed through the lens of the saintly image that had been created around him. The pressure to live up to this impossible standard sometimes felt overwhelming. There were also practical difficulties. His security detail had to be increased due to international attention, which he resented because it created distance between him and the people he served. Requests for his time came from around the world, speaking engagements, documentary interviews, meetings with other world leaders who wanted to associate themselves with his reputation. Most troubling were the attempts by various political movements to claim him as their symbol. Conservative politicians pointed to his personal responsibility and modest living as validation of their ideology. Progressive politicians highlighted his commitment to education and healthcare access. Each group tried to use his example to support their own agenda. Ibrahim consistently refused to be claimed by any political movement beyond his commitment to serving the people of Burkina Faso. I am not a symbol, he would say. I am a public servant. My job is not to represent any political philosophy except the simple belief that those who have the power to help others have the responsibility to do so. Perhaps the most meaningful long-term impact of Ibrahim's example was its effect on young people across Africa and beyond. Aisha, the 8-year-old girl he had hugged outside the presidential residence on his birthday, had become something of a symbol herself. Now in her second year of the scholarship program Ibrahim had established, she was excelling in her studies and had written an essay about wanting to become a doctor so I can help sick children like President Traoré helps all children. Her teacher submitted the essay to a continental writing competition, where it won first place. Across the continent, young people who had seen Ibrahim's example began organizing their own service projects. University students in Kenya started tutoring programs for younger children. High school students in Ghana organized fundraising drives for rural schools. Young professionals in Nigeria began donating a percentage of their salaries to education initiatives. The ripple effects extended beyond Africa as well. African diaspora youth in Europe and North America, often struggling with questions of identity and belonging, found in Ibrahim's example a source of pride in their heritage and a model for how to contribute positively to their communities. Despite the global attention, Ibrahim continued to find ways to maintain the quiet, personal connections that had always motivated him. He still visited the children's hospital, though now with more security and often accompanied by media who documented his interactions. He still responded personally to letters from children, though the volume had grown so large that he had to recruit volunteers to help. He still made unannounced visits to schools and villages, though these were increasingly difficult to keep private. In his most reflective moments, usually in the early morning hours when he sat with his tea by the window, he would think about the responsibility that came with being seen as a symbol of good leadership. The weight of representing hope for so many people was sometimes almost unbearable. But then he would remember the children's faces from that birthday night, their voices singing "Thank you for tomorrow," and he would find the strength to continue. Their futures depended not just on his individual actions, but on his ability to inspire others to action as well. 2 years after the birthday that changed everything, The impact of Ibrahim's example had created institutional changes that extended far beyond individual acts of kindness. The African Union had established the Traoré Leadership Award for heads of state who demonstrated exceptional commitment to serving their people. Rather than enriching themselves, international development organizations had restructured their programs based on the Burkina model, focusing on direct support to individuals rather than large-scale infrastructure projects that often failed to reach the people who needed help most. Most significantly, a new generation of political leaders across Africa was emerging, many of whom explicitly cited Ibrahim's example as their inspiration. These leaders campaigned on platforms of service rather than power, promised modest lifestyles rather than luxury, and committed to transparent, direct engagement with their people. The video of Ibrahim's birthday speech had been translated into over 50 languages and was used in leadership training programs from Harvard Business School to rural community colleges in Kenya. The simple message, if one man can do so much, imagine what we could accomplish together, had become a rallying cry for collaborative action around the world. In a rare moment of extended reflection, Ibrahim agreed to a long-form interview with a respected African journalist on the 3rd anniversary of his transformative birthday. Sitting in the same garden where he had received that first secret video, he spoke candidly about the experience of having his private acts of service exposed to the world. I learned that privacy is a luxury that leaders sometimes have to sacrifice for the greater good, he said. I didn't want those acts to be public, but once they were, I had to ask myself, what serves the people better? My comfort with privacy, or their ability to see that a different kind of leadership is possible? He spoke about the letters from children that continued to arrive daily, about the pressure of being seen as a symbol rather than a human being, about the responsibility of representing hope for millions of people who were looking for evidence that their leaders could be trusted. The hardest part, he admitted, is not disappointing people. When you represent hope, you carry the weight of everyone who believes in the possibility of change. That's a heavy burden, but it's also a sacred trust. By the 5th anniversary of that fateful birthday, what had begun as one man's quiet acts of service had evolved into a global movement for ethical leadership. The Promise to Tomorrow Foundation, established by donors inspired by Ibrahim's example, had provided scholarships to over 100,000 children across Africa, and was expanding to other continents. Political candidates around the world had begun taking Traoré pledges, public commitments to live modestly, serve transparently, and use their positions to lift up the most vulnerable members of their societies. While not all of them kept these promises, the very existence of such pledges had shifted public expectations about what leadership should look like. The annual March 14th movement had become a global day of service, with millions of people volunteering in their communities, donating to education initiatives, or simply performing acts of kindness in honor of the president who had shown them what was possible. That night, after the crowds had finally dispersed and the cameras had been put away, Ibrahim returned to his modest office. There, exactly where he had placed it years earlier, sat the small birthday card with uneven edges, the one that read, "Thank you for being our father when we needed one." Next to it was the framed photograph of his late mother. And beside that, a new addition, a letter from Aisha, now in university studying medicine, writing to tell him about her plans to return to rural Burkina Faso as a doctor. "You taught me that education is not just about lifting yourself up," she had written, "but about lifting others up with you. I promise to carry that lesson with me always." As Ibrahim read those words, he smiled through tears that had become familiar companions over the years. The journey from that quiet birthday morning to this moment had been unexpected, overwhelming, and sometimes painful. But as he looked at the evidence of lives changed, dreams realized, and hope restored, he knew that his mother's words had proven true. It really wasn't about the size of the cake. It was about the size of your heart. And sometimes if your heart was big enough, it could change the world. Outside his window, the city of Ouagadougou slept peacefully, its children dreaming of tomorrow. A tomorrow that, thanks to one man's quiet acts of love, looked brighter than ever before. The simple truth that had guided Ibrahim Traoré through his unlikely journey remained unchanged. True leadership was not about the power you accumulated, but about the lives you touched. And on that March 14th that changed everything, the world had learned that sometimes the greatest gifts are the ones we give when no one is watching. In homes across Africa and beyond, parents continued to tell their children the story of the president who cried on his birthday, not from sadness, but from joy at seeing what was possible when love was put into action. And those children, inspired by his example, grew up believing that they too could change the world, one act of kindness at a time. The legacy of that birthday continued to ripple outward, creating waves of hope that would touch shores not yet imagined, inspiring leaders not yet born, and building a future where the promise, "You'll see a better world when you're my age," would continue to be kept. One child at a time. If you love what our president does, pray for him in the comments so that God will help him to do even more before his next birthday. Also, tell us from which country you're watching.